house sat low against the earth, its wooden frame half sunken in reeds and moss by the edge of Coldwater Lake. It had once been a fisherman's cottage, now languishing under the weight of decades, its joints creaking in protest each time the wind shifted direction. My cousin Sam inherited it from an uncle neither of us remembered, some distant relative whose portrait still hung stubbornly in the hallway. A narrow sepia-toned face with eyes that seemed to follow you from room to room. It was early October when Sam invited me to spend a long weekend there. I remember because the trees had just begun to turn and the lake had taken on that slate-grey sheen it gets when the cold starts to sink in at night. The air was sharp, filled with the smell of wet leaves and loam, and the cottage had that persistent dampness that clung to your clothes and hair. There was no cell service out there, and the only real connection to the outside world was a landline near the back door, coiled like a sleeping snake beside a dusty radio. Sam was always more comfortable with isolation than I was. He said the silence out there helped him sleep. For me, though, the silence had weight, oppressive and listening. The lake didn't make sound at night. No rustling of animals, no insects, just the occasional soft thump of water against the dock, like someone gently knocking. On the first night, we settled in with a fire and a bottle of bourbon. The radio muttered static until Sam found an old blues station that faded in and out every few minutes. We joked about the portrait in the hallway, how the uncle's eyes seemed too bright, even under layers of dust. But somewhere around midnight, the mood shifted. The fire popped loudly, startling us both. Sam laughed, but it felt forced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being listened to. That night, I dreamt of wet footsteps on the floorboards, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth outside the bedroom door. When I woke up, there were faint marks on the wooden floor. Not distinct footprints, more like smudged impressions, as though someone had dragged something damp across the hallway while we slept. I told Sam. He shrugged it off, saying it was probably us tracking in water the night before. But I hadn't left the room after we'd gone to bed, and neither had he. Still, I let it go. The second day passed uneventfully. We fished, drank, and talked about people we hadn't seen in years. But by late afternoon, I noticed something strange. A red scarf was tied to a tree just off the trail behind the house. It wasn't there earlier. I asked Sam if he remembered it. He didn't. We walked out to it together, and the thing was tied in a tight, deliberate knot, like someone used it to mark a path. There were no footprints around it, but the earth was soft, and it had rained the day before. Any trace would have been washed away. Sam took it down and tossed it in the fire when we got back. Didn't say much, but I could tell it rattled him. That night, we locked all the doors and windows. We set alarms on our phones, even if they couldn't call anyone. Just something to give us a sense of control. Around 3:12 a.m., the alarms went off. I woke up instantly, heart hammering in my chest. Sam burst out of his room at the same time. We met in the hallway, wide-eyed, barely speaking. The front door was still locked, the windows too. We stood in the living room, shivering in our t-shirts, the chill from the lake seeping in with each breath. Then came a tapping sound, soft, repetitive. It wasn't at the front door. It was at the window next to the fireplace, the one that looked directly out over the dock. But when we turned to look, nothing was there. Just the lake, still and colourless, and the reflection of the room behind us in the glass. I moved closer to the window and for a second thought I saw a shape in the water, just below the surface. It could have been a fish, could have been a trick of the light. We didn't sleep after that. At dawn, we searched the perimeter. Footprints should have been easy to spot in the soft dirt, but there was nothing, not even an animal trail. The only new addition was a single carved symbol etched into the wood beneath the back window. A spiral, like a whirlpool, crudely drawn with something sharp. Sam scraped it off with a chisel and muttered something about teenagers messing around. But Coldwater Lake didn't have teenagers. The nearest house was over a mile down the shoreline, and we hadn't seen another living soul since we got there. That afternoon, I tried the landline. No dial tone. Sam took the car into town for supplies and to call the phone company. He was gone 4 hours. I stayed behind, trying not to look at the portrait in the hallway. It wasn't until night fell again that things truly unraveled. I was in the kitchen when I heard the soft creak of the floorboards upstairs. I froze. The house had only one level. I knew every step, every board. There was no upstairs, but the sound was unmistakable. Slow pacing above my head, deliberate, steady. I backed into the living room, heart pounding, and reached for the fireplace poker. Then I saw the portrait. It had shifted. Ever so slightly, the head was tilted more to the left, the eyes aligned directly with mine. I moved closer, inspecting the frame, convincing myself I was imagining it, but there were fresh scratch marks on the wall beneath it, as if it had been torn down and roughly rehung. I turned toward the front door, intending to step outside to get some air, maybe even walk down to the road. But the lock was jammed. It wouldn't turn, no matter how hard I twisted. The windows, too, sealed tight, almost as if they'd been painted shut in the hours I'd been alone. Then the radio turned on by itself. It didn't play music this time, just a whisper, unintelligible at first, growing clearer with each breath. They never left. The voice was low, rhythmic, as though mimicking speech without words. It was layered, not one voice but many, overlapping just enough to become unbearable. I ripped the plug from the wall, but the sound continued. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe minutes, maybe longer. I only remember the headlights cutting through the window, sudden and blinding. Sam had returned. He found me curled under the kitchen table, clutching the poker. We didn't talk much. He'd driven into town, but the road back had been blocked. A fallen tree, fresh, like it had been cut deliberately. He'd had to detour through miles of back road to return. When I told him what happened, he didn't laugh, but he didn't believe me either, not entirely. We left the next morning. Sam boarded up the windows and disconnected the landline. Said he'd figure out what to do with the place later. Neither of us went back, but 2 weeks later, I got a call from the sheriff's department in that area. A pair of hikers had been reported missing. Their last known location was near the northern trailhead by Coldwater Lake. They'd found a campsite abandoned, but with signs of recent use. A torn red scarf tied to a tree, and in the dirt nearby, a strange spiral carved into the earth. I didn't tell them what happened. Didn't mention the footsteps or the voice or the shifting portrait. What could I say? But I looked up that uncle, the one whose name was on the deed. He had a record. Committed in the late 60s for delusional ideation and violent hallucinations. Released in 82. disappeared 3 years later. They never found him. Still, sometimes late at night, when the wind is high and the power flickers, I think about that house. I think about what we heard and what we didn't, about the voice on the radio, about the shape I saw in the lake, and about the eyes in the hallway that never quite looked away.